Chapter 1. Ellie. Paul said the name aloud to himself as he lay on the bed in his dorm room in Pioneer Hall on the U of M campus in Minneapolis. "What'd you say?" said Richard, who was sitting on his bed, looking at a Playboy magazine and drinking a Coke. Paul had been in such a reverie he forgot he wasn't alone. Sharing a room with a stranger is going to take some getting used to. "Oh, nothing," he told his roommate. "Uh-huh. Does that nothing happen to walk on two long legs? I saw you leaving with that girl after that thing today." Richard then felt the need to add, "She was cute for a punk chick. Except for those eyes. What's up with that?" "It's called heterochromia something, and I think they're beautiful." "She's hetero? If you say so." Richard laughed at his joke, while Paul rolled his eyes. "Bowie's got that right. Not a fan of myself, but he's got a couple good songs, I guess," he reluctantly admitted. "Actually, his eyes aren't—" Never mind. Paul considered correcting him, but let it drop. Especially since Paul made the same mistake when he brought it up to Ellie, and she informed him that while Bowie wore different colored contacts sometimes, his condition was a permanently dilated pupil resulting from a fight. Why did I even bring it up? She must get that all the time. If it annoyed her, she didn't show it though, so he tried not to focus on that and just replayed the last few hours in his mind. It was the first orientation class in a lecture hall in Kaufman Union. Paul and Richard headed to the back seats, but when Paul made to sit next to his new roommate, Richard admonished him that dudes don't do that, and motioned for him to move a couple seats over. Spots were filling up quickly. The U was a big school after all. There were already more people in here than his entire high school graduating class. He looked down at the brochure he had for other Welcome Week activities. "Hi, is somebody sitting there?" said a voice in an accent Paul couldn't place. Paul looked up into the most beautiful face he had seen in person. Amazingly, a blue eye and a brown eye stared back into his expectantly. No," he said after an awkward pause, standing up to let her to the open seat. As she squeezed past, he caught Richard looking her up and down, and suddenly aware of his own gaze, directed it to the stage for the rest of the presentation. Afterwards, as Paul was leaving, he heard, "Excuse me," and turned around to see her holding a wallet. "I think this is yours?" He checked his back pocket. It had indeed fallen out. "Oh, God, thank you." He took it and instinctively opened it, checking the contents. "Making sure I didn't take anything?" she asked, smiling wryly. "What? No, of course not. Actually, can I offer you a finder's fee?" He nervously pulled out a $5 bill. She looked at it, then at him, and furrowed her brow. "That's kind of insulting, don't you think?" she said reproachfully. "Is it? I'm sorry. I didn't mean to insult." She quickly yanked the money from his hand, saw the look on his face, and laughed. "Tell you what, let's go see what they have in the vending machines. I'm famished." "Sure. Yeah, that sounds good," Paul said as casually as he could, despite the buzzing that seemed to be coursing through his entire body. Did she really just ask me to go with her? They walked together down to the lower level of Kaufman Union. For the next hour, they hung out in the student lounge, downing pop and several bags of junk food. He learned her name was Ellie Bjornsdottir. She was on a work-study from Iceland. She waited tables at a restaurant in Stadium Village, and she lived off campus in a place called Prospect Park. Paul asked her about Iceland, but she said it made her too sad and homesick to talk about it. Instead, she told him about the local music scene she had gotten into here. Bands like The Replacements. Did he know they were playing here at Kaufman Union soon? He did not. Husker Du. Husker Du what? And Prince, who she actually got to see when he played an impromptu show with Sheila E. at 7th Street Entry. He knew them, at least. He noted that she seemed to know a lot about the city, considering she hadn't been here that long. "I wanted to fit in here. I thought learning as much as I could about the city would help. And when I went to a bar and saw my first live rock show, I was, hooked?" Paul interjected. She nodded yes. "It also gave me a sense of community here, not to mention a new look." Yeah, I like the way you look, Paul said, suddenly aware of how that sounded. I mean, I feel like such a dork in comparison. He looked down at his polo shirt and khaki pants, and back at her patch-covered army jacket, black jeans with holes in the knees, and army boots. Doc Martens, he would later learn. Her hair was also unique compared to the other girls. No, women, he corrected his thoughts. He wasn't in high school anymore. Teased silver-white tresses framed her face, with a row of bangs stopping just above her dark, thick eyebrows. "We can work on that if you want," she said. This statement, intimating possible future time spent together, did not go unnoticed by Paul. "And anyway, you look fine. So, what kind of music are you into?" "Well, most of what I know of music is from the radio. Mostly classic rock and pop, I guess. I don't know much about punk. That wasn't really going on in Valleydale." She asked what it was like in his hometown, but he didn't really want to talk about it. Not because it made him sad, as in her case, but because he hated it. To him, Valleydale was the town so dumb they named it twice. He assumed he'd have to explain his joke, but her English was better than most native speakers. "It's not even in a valley," he said with exasperation, making her laugh. All I wanted was to leave behind that small-town mentality and start a new life in a new place. "Things are already so much better here," he thought to himself, sitting across from Ellie. He started talking about the classes he was taking, and was about to ask her what she had signed up for when she yawned, making Paul fear he was boring her. "Sorry," she said, "just tired. I got up pretty early today. I should be getting back home. I have work tomorrow." "Oh, right. How are you getting home? Is it far?" "No, it's probably a mile from here. There's a water tower on the top of the hill. They call it the Witch's Hat Tower. You can actually see it from the river road." "I don't really even know my way around campus yet. I do know how to get back to my dorm from here, and that's about it. I'm in Pioneer Hall." "Well, you're on the river road. That's the way I'll be going. I can walk you home." Sure, that'd be great," Paul said, thinking, yes, that would be great. Amazing. Unbelievable, even. It occurred to him that her proposal was something of a gender reversal. Not that he cared, though. They walked side by side through the campus. The setting sun was making the surrounding trees glow, enhancing their already golden autumnal splendor. Students wandered around with no study obligations except that of familiarizing themselves with their new world, a world which for Paul felt full of possibility. Hadn't he fantasized of meeting someone like this as he sat alone in his bedroom in Valleydale, staring out at the cornfields outside his window? Is this even real? He was brought back to earth by the realization that they had already arrived at his dorm. "So, do you want company walking to your place? It's starting to get dark," Paul said hopefully. Ellie smiled. "I'll be fine, but thanks." She turned to look up the road, saying, "Guess you can't see the tower from here after all. Maybe closer to the bridge. If you have time tomorrow, you should walk up a little further and check it out. Some people think it inspired Bob Dylan to write All Along the Watchtower, but that might be apocryphal." Huh. Paul didn't know what that meant, but he was sure that was a Jimi Hendrix song. He let it slide. "Well, if I don't end up seeing the tower tomorrow, can I still see you?" he asked, feeling atypically brave. Glacial ice looked into his right eye, polished mahogany into his left, leaving Paul feeling unsteady as he awaited her answer. "Sure," she said. "I'm off work at 5. Stop by the Big Ten. You'll find it in Stadium Village." "Great. Sounds good. I will see you then." Unsure of what to do next, he extended his hand and said, "It was nice to meet you." Chuckling, she shook his hand, responding, "Nice to meet you, Paul." She turned, walked a few steps, turned back, and said, "Thanks for the snacks." Paul gave a thumbs up, immediately felt stupid, then waved. He watched as she turned and walked up the path. Paul finally stepped into his dorm. In a community room to the side of the main hall, someone was at the piano. Dressed all in black, with a mass of teased dark hair atop a cherubic face, sat a young man expertly playing a song Paul didn't recognize. Maybe it was an original piece. It filled the air in Paul's head with a sense of bittersweet yearning. In a daze, he made his way to his room. She walked you home? Paul and Richard walked through the quad, the mall as it was known at the U. As Paul recounted his date, is that what it was? Regardless, he regretted saying that part, as Richard responded as expected. But Paul couldn't contain his excitement over the previous day's events, and he had to tell someone. Look, Richard said, I don't know how they do things where you come from, but I'd die before I'd let that happen. Did you at least kiss her when she left? I shook her hand. Wow. Well, it sounds like you had a very pleasant business meeting. Did you arrange another appointment, or did she realize she was all booked out until forever? Paul wasn't going to let Richard's ribbing get him down. He was going to see her again tonight, that's all that mattered. Until then, he would hang out with his roommate and go to some of the other lame Welcome Week events scheduled for the day. Paul knew he and Richard were very different, but after spending more time with him, he believed Richard's brusque talk and macho act was a cover for being just as in the dark as he was about all this relationship stuff. And despite his bravado and some regressive beliefs, he wasn't unkind. Paul imagined they made an amusing duo, Paul tall and gangly, and Richard short and stocky. They were the Stan and Laurel of the freshman class. When Paul said he was going to meet her at her work, Richard said they should go there and grab a couple drinks before she got off. While Paul wasn't sure if that was such a good idea, he also didn't know if it was a terrible one. If there were rules to any of this, he didn't know what they were. Soon they were at the Big Ten and ordering beer. While the drinking age had recently changed to 21, thankfully they both had legacy status. Eventually they spotted Ellie waiting tables. Before that, any time a woman would walk by, Richard would nudge him, motion towards her with his eyes, and waggle his eyebrows up and down like he was Benny Hill. Paul would shake his head no, hoping he'd stop, to which Richard would just laugh and slap him on the back. When Ellie finally was able to come over, he said, "Oh, here comes your business associate," laughing at his own joke. "Hi, Paul. Who's your friend?" Ellie inquired. "This is my roommate, Richard Silvestri, at your service." Richard extended his hand. When she took it, he pulled it towards his lips as if to kiss it, but she snatched it back quickly. "Charming." She did her best to ignore Richard then and directed towards Paul. "I'm about done here. Did you want to go for a walk down by the river?" "Sounds nice. Richard, did you want to come along?" Paul heard those words come out of his mouth and lost all hope in any kind of a romantic future with anyone ever. Ellie looked baffled. Thankfully, Richard answered, "And get stabbed by some maniac in the woods? I'll pass, thanks." Relieved at this, Paul said, "We're on campus, Richard, not Camp Crystal Lake." "Don't worry, Richard," Ellie said, punching him in the shoulder. "Paul's got me to protect him." She put her arm around Paul, and he smiled sheepishly at Richard and shrugged. Richard grimaced, either with disgust or pain from Ellie's jab. "I'm going to punch out," and she made to hit Richard again, who flinched. Ellie laughed and ruffled his hair instead. "Be right back." Richard turned to Paul and said, "I think you're dating a guy." The path along the river was more wild and wooded than Paul expected, considering it was just on the other side of the road from his dorm. Ellie, despite her urban look and attire, seemed to fit in among the foliage. Was he imagining that every tree she approached seemed to sway and rustle its leaves? "It's just the wind, Paul," he told himself. Suddenly there was a rapid-fire knocking sound, and Paul spotted a woodpecker hammering its beak into a dead tree trunk. "Whoa, that's so cool," he said quietly, not wishing to scare it. "I've never seen one in real life. Makes me think of one of those telegraph operators, except on coke. Actually, I guess it's more like a jackhammer. Forget I said anything," he said, frustrated at his simile attempts. Ellie watched it, lost in thought, then eventually said, "What's a telegraph?" This surprised Paul. Wouldn't they have taught about that in Iceland? He described it the best he could, and how they used Morse code, and what that was. You could also use that code other ways. When I was a kid, I had this friend Tim who lived pretty close, and our bedroom windows faced each other. For a while, every night when we were supposed to be in bed, we would send messages with flashlights. Nothing too elaborate. Usually it would just devolve into curse words back and forth. Paul said, smiling at the memory. Sounds like there were some good times in Valleydale for you. Yeah, I had fun with the few friends I had when I was younger there. They all moved on in high school, though. Got girlfriends, became popular. I don't know. Paul trailed off, feeling pathetic. I had someone close to me change. She stopped, the pause hanging in the air like smoke from a doused fire. But that's in the past. I just want to focus on the here and now, she said, looking at him then with those exceptional eyes, as a gust of wind brought leaves falling down around them. Come on, we're almost to the bridge. The path had disappeared by then, and they scampered up the hill, Ellie doing that far more competently. They reached the top and climbed over the barricade onto the pathway, surprising a young couple walking by, to whom Paul apologized, while Ellie snorted a laugh. There, from the I-94 bridge, she pointed out the Witch's Hat Tower. So now you know where I live. Or near where I live, of course. I don't live in the tower, she said, correcting herself. I can walk from here, and you know the way back to your dorm? I think I can figure it out. You sure you don't want company on the rest of your walk? No, I can't ask you to walk all the way there and back to your place. You should go and get some sleep. I have plans to show you more of the city tomorrow, if you're up for it, that is. That would be amazing, Paul answered, legitimately enthused. Well, goodbye, she said, outstretching her hand. Paul took it to shake, but she brought his hand to her lips and kissed it. Then, laughing, gave him a hug, and when that ended, too soon for Paul, she left with the parting words, Watch out for any knife-wielding maniacs out there. You too, Paul said back. He lifted up his hand to see the dark lipstick on there and walked back home, barely lifting his eyes from it. The next day, Paul awoke to rain tapping against the dorm window. A cold, rainy day was a disappointment, and he worried that Ellie would cancel due to the weather. Still, he didn't want to go to have breakfast in the cafeteria and miss her call. He made the mistake of telling Richard that, and he reacted as expected, disturbed at this role reversal. The guy is not the one who should be waiting by the phone. Even though Paul explained why he couldn't call her. Ellie had an old landlady who she lived with that freaked out if any strangers called there, let alone visited in person. Richard left, shaking his head, but saying that he'd bring him back some cereal and a little carton of milk, because you're such a pussy, Paul heard him say under his breath as he left. The longest half hour in his life passed before the phone rang. An hour later, he met Ellie at the bus stop she had directed him to. She was wearing her usual regalia, but had on one of those old-fashioned plastic rain scarves that tie under the chin. It seemed a little incongruous with her style, but somehow she still managed to pull it off. The rain had let up some, but they stayed under the enclosure, watching the people rushing around and the cars driving past, splashing the occasional unwary pedestrian. Soon Paul was on his first city bus, on his first trip to the heart of Minneapolis. They got off on Hennepin Avenue, and looking around, Paul felt very out of his element. While the U of M campus was a large school, crowded with students, it at least felt orderly and refined. Here on this street was a chaotic assortment of small, seedy establishments, many of them catering to men's more baser desires. It felt like a small slice of New York, or what he knew of it from film. It was gritty, gross, but also thrilling in a dangerous sort of way. They passed a strip bar called Augie's, and then a dirty bookstore whose images in the windows made Paul stop and stare. He pretended to be mesmerized and unable to move, causing Ellie to roll her eyes and, grabbing his hand, said, "All right, young sir, close your eyes. I'm going to guide you through these temptations." He complied, and she led him to the next block, even helping him across the street by indicating the curbs. She's holding my hand, is all Paul could think, focusing on her touch. She could lead me into traffic, and I'd die happy. He tried to remember the last time a peer held his hand. Kindergarten, maybe? All right, you can open them now. They were standing in front of a small storefront with the words Rifle Sport spray-painted above the door. Is this a gun store? Paul asked, surprised. Come on, she said, letting go of his hand, to his disappointment, and going inside. He followed uncertainly. It turned out to be an art gallery. Thought you could use some culture, Ellie said, bruising Paul's ego a little. Hey, I'm cultured. I've seen Monty Python and the Holy Grail like 8 times. She responded she didn't know what that was, and Paul showed great restraint by not quoting any lines at her right then. He would have to have her watch it one day, though. "Wow, this artist sure hates Mickey Mouse, huh?" he instead commented. They were looking at one large canvas which portrayed Mickey angrily gesturing from a podium, while below him an army of Goofies marched, all sporting armbands with the mouse ears logo. "I think the artist was more interested in equating capitalism with fascism," Ellie said, then looked around at the other artworks and noted, "But yes, I don't think he's a fan." "Ellie!" a voice came from behind them. "My Icelandic queen!" A man with a mohawk of short dreadlocks, a dreadhawk, thought Paul, deciding he'd keep that portmanteau to himself, came walking up from the entrance. "Ezekiel!" Ellie nearly shouted, going to hug him. They embraced, for a little too long, Paul felt, and when they let each other go, she looked at Paul and introduced them. "Nice to meet you, Ezekiel," Paul said, extending his hand. "Call me Zeke," he responded, hugging him instead and patting his back, to Paul's surprise. Paul returned the gesture, his hand getting poked by the studs on the back of Zeke's denim vest. They parted and Paul rubbed his palm. "Only Ellie uses my full name. It amuses her for some reason. Still, any friend of hers," he trailed off. He turned to Ellie and asked, "Where have you been? Haven't seen you uptown in a while." "You know I'm starting school next week. I can't be hanging around McDonald's and getting ready for classes at the same time." "Right. So is this, what, a field trip?" "Just showing my friend Paul here some sights. He's new to town and I wanted to get off campus for a day." "So bring him uptown. We miss you and that accent of yours." "Bring Paul? The McPunks would eat him alive," she said, looking at Paul up and down. Wait, is she embarrassed of me? No, that doesn't make sense. Why would she be spending time with me then? Paul thought worriedly. Well, maybe in that jacket. Just lose the members only and you'd be fine, Zeke said to Paul. The Who shirt is cool, though. Joey Ramone wears the same one. Actually, if you grew your hair out, you'd kind of look like him. Less like Rick Ocasek, at least, he said, flicking Paul's mullet with his fingers. And anyway, you should talk, Icelander, he said to Ellie. When I first met you, you looked like you just left your job at the Renfest. Like, did Scandinavians not advance past Viking times on your island? He said, looking at Ellie, then to Paul as he laughed. Hey, shut up, Ellie said, playfully punching him in the shoulder. No, it is true. Ezekiel here took pity on me when he saw me standing alone at my first show. Next day, he took me to Ragstock and is partly responsible for my look. Yeah, and you're partly responsible for my bruises, he said. Paul's mind raced to some dark places before Zeke added, She slam dances harder than most guys. You got to be careful hanging around this one. Got it, was all Paul could think to say. Speaking of Ragstock, I was thinking I could take Paul there next. Interested? I got nothing else going on today. Why not? Zeke answered. So the three walked together to the store. Paul was initially annoyed at the introduction of a third wheel, especially when he felt like maybe that was becoming his role. But Zeke was cool, and something told Paul that he would not be vying for Ellie's affection. In the store, Paul found a World War II long wool pea coat that he thought was both unique and practical, and best of all, received approval from Ellie and Zeke. Ellie found a t-shirt with the Hams Bear mascot on it, which Paul insisted on buying for her, and received no objection. He heard Zeke say something about sugar daddy, which earned a shove from Ellie. Zeke laughed and put his hands up in resignation. They doubled back to Hennepin Avenue then, Paul feeling like a new man in his new old coat. At 7th Street, Ellie pointed out First Avenue at the end of the street, the club that had recently gained international fame with Prince's film. No, Paul hadn't seen it. Ellie said the live performances were amazing, but they treated the women in it like garbage. Literally in one scene, she said. Zeke asked Ellie if she was going to see some band called X that was playing the main room that night. She answered no, to which he said, I figured, you really need to broaden your horizons. There's more to music than what's going on in the Minneapolis scene. Maybe, she responded, but I got all I need right here. Then she grabbed an arm of both Zeke and Paul and led them to their next destination just up the street, a record store called Northern Lights. Paul picked out a Pete Townsend album, thinking it was probably an uncool choice, but it was new and he wanted to add it to his collection. Ellie got a replacements record. Just released, she said excitedly. Paul began to offer to buy it for her, but she stopped him before he got the words out, shooting a look at Zeke, who smirked. They said goodbye to him there, as he wanted to flip through the bins longer. He embraced them both, saying to Ellie, Take care of that guy. He feels like a babe in the woods. Then to Paul, be seeing you around, babe. Yeah, it was nice to meet you, was what he managed to say before Ellie grabbed his arm and led him out. Soon they were on the bus and heading back to campus. When they got back, Ellie asked if she could come up to his room and listen to their new records. Paul naturally felt this was a great idea and was especially thankful to find that Richard wasn't there. He put on the album called Tim first, and they sat on the bed as the music filled the room. To think my parents balked at me wanting to bring my stereo to school, he recalled. While it played, Ellie went on about the band, how they started out kind of hardcore but were getting away from that, how their shows were really hit and miss depending how drunk they were, and how despite being chaotic, they were brilliant live. Oh, and the singer has your name, she said. To Paul it was an exciting, edgy sound, but also with moments of surprising sensitivity. He especially responded to a song called Swing and Party. The lyric, "If being alone's a crime, I'm serving forever," really resonated with him. They listened to both sides, and when it was done, he was surprised that Ellie wanted to listen to the record he had bought. It was a live recording, and on one song, Townsend told the audience it was a cover, and that he was giving prizes after the show to anyone who can guess what it's about, before launching into a beautiful and melancholic tune titled Save It for Later. It didn't take long before Ellie said, "Oh, it's about fellatio." Paul immediately turned red at this revelation as she continued, "Why are guys so obsessed with blowjobs?" Paul wasn't sure if she was being rhetorical, so he sat there awkwardly. Finally he said, "I don't know," then continued, "I wouldn't know." Ellie looked at him as the realization set in and said, "I'm sorry. Hope I didn't embarrass you. So you never... No, I've never even been on a date. In high school I had girls who were friends, but nothing ever really developed past that. I don't know. Maybe it's my lack of confidence, or maybe I just haven't met the right kind of person." "What kind of person would you like to meet?" Ellie asked. Paul gathered his courage and answered, "Someone like you." She had to know, right? She had to know what the answer was going to be when she asked me that, right? Paul thought. There was a pause before Ellie said, "Oh. Well," she said, looking at him through a squint, "you're not going to try to jump my bones or anything, right?" "No. And now I'm sorry. I don't want you to feel uncomfortable. I've been having fun spending time with you, and I don't want to jeopardize our friendship, which I hope—" "Paul," Ellie interrupted, "it's okay. I like you. The reason I hung out with you that first night at Kaufman Union was because I could tell you were kind, and you seemed like a fish out of water. It was cute." "So you think I'm cute?" Paul added jokingly. That's not what I said, but sure. Anyway, that was me when I arrived here, dealing with culture shock and trying to make any connection I could for some kind of anchor. Look, there's a lot I haven't told you about. It's very complicated. I'll just say I had a bad breakup with someone in my hometown in Iceland. Someone who I thought I knew, but she paused, sighing. Well, he changed. Then things got ugly and I needed to get away. Somehow I ended up here. I mean, I planned to come here, it was a very sudden decision." "I get it. And sorry that sounds rough. I promise, though, that I'll never change on you. I'll always be this awkward." And just then the door opened, and in stepped Richard, who was obviously drunk. "Oh, sorry. Hope I'm not interrupting anything. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink," he said, then proceeded to fall face first onto his bed. Was that a Monty Python reference? Maybe I'm more like Richard than I realized, thought Paul with a shudder. "I think that's my cue," said Ellie. "Care to walk me home?" Paul, surprised at the offer, grabbed his coat, and they left Richard, who mumbled incoherently at Paul's goodbye. The rain had stopped, but a chilly wind was blowing, cold even for late September. Paul turned his collar up, hoping it made him look cool, like Bowie on the Low album cover. The gray sky gave no indication of where the sun might be, but there was little daytime left as they walked up the river road and then up Franklin Avenue, heading ever uphill towards where Ellie presumably lived. They walked mostly in silence. Paul felt Ellie's mood had changed. Perhaps she was reflecting on the conversation they had in his room. He really hoped his admission had not irreparably altered their nascent friendship. As he contemplated the wisdom of his words, she stopped in front of a house and asked him, "Do you know the history of this place?" "No, no idea," he said. "It just looked like a regular, quaint old house." "Less than 80 years ago, a mob of 100 white people gathered at this house to scare a black family from moving into this neighborhood." "Wait, what? That's horrible. I mean, I'd expect that kind of thing in the South, but not here." "Minneapolis is full of stories like that, but it's been buried by those who want to portray it as a progressive, kind-hearted place. It's just a veneer, though, this Minnesota nice," Ellie said, staring at the house. Paul stood there quietly, not sure how to respond. Finally, he said, "But at least things are better now, right? Laws have changed." "Oh, Paul, you're so naive. There's so much you don't know about the very place you live in." Paul, feeling hurt, but also shame at the truth of her words, replied, "So you've got no problems in Iceland? Is it some kind of utopia there?" Ellie glared at him, then looked off for a moment before saying, "It's getting late. You better go home. Maybe I'll see you tomorrow." With that, she abruptly turned and walked off. Paul stood there dumbfounded. With tears flowing and his throat constricting, he stumbled home, wondering what had happened and what he had done to cause it. He walked into his room. Richard had not moved since Paul had last seen him, but he knew he was still alive from all the snoring. It barely registered to him, though. He was too preoccupied with the despair that was now spreading through his brain like an ink droplet in water. He knew he needed to calm down. Then he remembered the records. Ellie had left hers there. He put on his headphones, slid the vinyl from its sleeve, lowered side one onto the spindle, and set the needle carefully down at the beginning of the last track. "If being afraid is a crime, we hang side by side," Paul mouthed the words after the fifth listen, then felt his consciousness drifting away. He was awakened by the phone ringing. Richard mumbled something like, "Shut it up," as Paul checked his watch, 12:10, and picked up the receiver. Ellie answered, "Paul, I'm sorry. Can you go to that spot over I-94 on the river road where you can see the Witch's Hat Tower?" Paul, elated by this turn of events, said he could, but what would he be able to see in the middle of the night? "Just go there and look to the tower. Can you be there at 12:30? Still in his clothes, Paul threw on his coat and was almost out the door when he went back and grabbed Ellie's record. He sprinted down the stairs, through the main hall, out into the courtyard, and then up the path that runs along the upper bank of the Mississippi. When he got to the point where he could see the tower, he was surprised that the clouds had cleared and a full moon was positioned above, softly illuminating it. He checked his watch. It was 12:27. Is this what she wanted him to see? It was a nice scene, but he didn't understand what it meant. Was she going to meet him here? He stood there as the occasional car drove past, making him feel conspicuous. He checked his watch again. 12:30. He stared at the tower and then, remarkably, he saw a light flashing. It was coming from the area of the observation deck. At first Paul thought it was random. Suddenly, though, he was a child again, watching his friend flash a message to him from his bedroom. Paul decoded it easily. If this was Ellie, she was adept at it. The lights were spaced at perfect intervals, and the message repeated a few times. Dash dot dash dot. C. Dash dash dash. O. Dash dash M. Dot E. Dot dot dash U. Dot dash dash dot P. Come up. He didn't need to be told twice. He ran as fast as he could, propelled by adrenaline and anticipation. Despite never having been there, it was a simple matter of continually going upwards. By the time he reached the tower, his legs were burning, and he was out of his last breath. He looked up toward where the light must have come from, but it was dark. Then he noticed the metal door at the top of the short stairway. It was covered with vines, which he thought was odd, but even stranger, it was ajar. Cautiously, he stepped up and poked his head in. "Hello?" he said into the darkness. "Hey." It was Ellie's voice, echoing like it was coming from inside of a drum. Then a bright light hit his eyes, briefly blinding him. "Oops, sorry," she said, and the spotlight shifted. As his sight recovered, he saw her there, sitting at the bottom of a stairwell that appeared to wind around a giant round metal wall. She stood up, said, "Come on," and she started climbing the stairs, pointing the large flashlight ahead so all Paul saw was her silhouette disappearing as the stairs curved. He hurried to follow. "So did you just pretend not to know Morse code?" he asked. "No, I'm just a quick learner. I was hoping you'd appreciate the gesture," she answered as she continued to climb. Paul followed, bewildered. He had a million questions, but unable to voice any at the moment, he just kept moving, battling claustrophobia from the narrow stairwell that wound between the exterior wall and the well wall. A few steps up, and there was a slam as the door shut behind them. "Just air pressure. Don't let it scare you," Ellie said. Wait, should I be scared? Thought Paul. It was all so strange, but Paul felt only exhilaration. Finally, they reached the top. "Wow," is all he could say. Outstretched before them, past the cement railing and arches, lay the city below. He could see the downtown skyline lit up in the distance, and the moon shining down on the trees and buildings nearby. He stepped up to the railing and gazed out at the scene. "This is amazing," he said, then more to himself added, "I can't believe they keep this open at night." Realizing he still had the record in his hand, said, "I brought Tim back," turning around to address Ellie. "I left it for you," she said quietly. "I don't have a way to play it." Ellie was sitting on the floor, her head down, staring at her hands in her lap. Then he noticed the things around the floor of the observation deck. She sat on a sleeping bag next to a tiny table that held a lit candle and book. There was also a duffel bag, a Walkman, and a variety of indistinct things lying about. "Wait," he said incredulously. This is where you've been living?" "I'm so sorry, Paul," she said tearfully, ignoring his question. "I have a lot of anger about a lot of things, none of which has to do with you. I took it out on you earlier, and that was unkind." At the realization that Ellie was crying, he quickly shook off the surprise of her living situation and went to sit down facing her. He took her hands in his and said, "I hope you feel safe with me, that you can tell me anything, but I also understand if you can't. I just want to be here for you in whatever capacity you need." "Oh, Paul," she said, placing her hand on the side of his face. Then she bent forward, kissing his cheek. Pulling back a little, she looked into his eyes, with those unorthodox eyes of hers, then moved forward, her eyes closing. Paul did the same, and they kissed. When Paul opened his eyes, the world had changed. Literally. A few seconds ago, he was filled with the thrill of something he had never experienced before, with a person he had so much feeling for, but all that was replaced now by complete confusion. The dark night sky was now a bright blue one. The cement balustrade, arches, and ceiling had disappeared. The smooth floor had become rough and uneven stone. The moon was gone. Overhead shone the bright sun. After looking around at all this, he looked at Ellie, who looked just as shocked as he felt. He stood up, then she did. All he could manage to say was, "What?" Ellie moved forward, and Paul, feeling suddenly fearful, took a step back. "Stop, Paul!" she shouted. But it was too late. Paul was falling.